The Necrons are masters of changing the physics of reality to ships that move from one place to another using inertialess drives, or fast travelling as I like to say, to summoning weapons and collected individuals. Trazyn, I'm looking at you, from pocket dimensions, only a hand movement away. But what about time? What is their command of time? Friends, let's find out, and welcome to another 40k video. Today we'll examine examples using Orikan the Diviner and Setek from The Infinite and the Divine and Ahriman Eternal. For our first insight, there is a moment we are told Orikan has been living the last 20 minutes over and over again, to an amount of 3 years cumulative, to get from the first plinth to the object that lay within. So by itself, what does this show us? That Necrons can move time forward and backwards, thus the loop, do this within a contained area and for a single person, and that they can control both the length of the loop and the overall time operating within it. Later, in one of their confrontations, we see a fight between Trazyn and Orikan. In Trazyn's vision, the head of the weapon blurred, a chrono field boiling around it. Orikan was speeding himself up, creating a pocket of time, where for him it moved faster. So the pocket of time can be of an area that both surrounds an individual and emits another, but not always. Feeling vengeful towards him, Orikan focuses his abilities on Trazyn. Orikan wants Trazyn to feel every moment of his humiliation and sends a pulse of pure time-space through the staff, slowing his injuries so Trazyn feels them, the damage repairing slowly rather than its usual speed. Now another distinct ability is to see the future. For example, when Orikan and Trazyn are made to be allies, Orikan sees something is coming, that Orc ships will intervene in their actions. Every zodiac he has cast say so, and if they fight them in the sky, they will deploy ground forces who will discover and destroy the tomb both Necrons are seeking. And another example is when Orikan runs into a Xenos, a gene stealer, if memory serves. In the moment that happens, he casts his mind backwards to change his path so he does not run into the creature, but arrives in time to see it retreat, its body pivoted and it melded back into the shadows. So you can see with Orikan, he can walk down and backtrack on divergent time paths based on what he can see. A lot of these examples have been when in combat. But what about more scholarly pursuits? When Orikan floated in Datia, he had been there for so long, he had to check his chrono positioning. A very important thing with all these abilities of Orikan is him actually keeping track of everything, so that he doesn't loop for longer than he needs to do, for example. 66 years, a good amount of study, enough time to delve into the mysterious. That's the name of a device Orikan and Trazyn are chasing. So Orikan has really infinite time to complete certain tasks by this measure. Later in the novel, for example, Orikan is buried underground, but yet emerges not much later after it had happened, but had expelled great energy affecting time around him, as he had to have dug himself out over a long period of time within this specific area. A question worth asking at this point is, if Orikan can make all these choices, why is he not the ruler of the galaxy? If he can go anywhere and do anything he wishes, avoiding certain paths, using his time abilities to get himself enough time to accomplish what he wishes, what holds him back? The limits hold him back. And Orikan may be in one place, using his abilities to bend time, but for the rest of the galaxy, who can't turn back time, or find a way to get more time, they might affect what he's doing within that bubble. And as mentioned, energy is the other limit. All time effects he does are limited by his own power, in terms of the level of effect he can work and how often. And that's a pretty effective in-game mechanic as well. At the end of the novel, Trazyn and Orikan face a Satan shard. Several in fact. And realise the Necrons around them are not to guard the tomb they had entered, they are to contain the Satan. So Trazyn asks Orikan to use his abilities. Orikan moves his hands like a conductor, and a sound came like mortar grinding on pestle. Warriors stirred and weapons were raised, volcanic shells cracking and crumbling as their joints moved, exposing dull brass metal beneath. So we can see he can also heal or decay people with his abilities, another aspect of it. Now we move into the novel Ahriman Eternal. So for context, in Ahriman Eternal, after failing with the first two rubrics, the Ahriman's great efforts that were performed by him to stop the flesh change that are afflicting his brothers in the Thousand Sons. Both efforts to heal them and restore their minds have failed, so he turns to the technology of the Necrons to make another effort to fix his mistake. The Necron who can do this is called Setek, and he is attacked by Credence, and then rust and decay float over Credence's joints and plating as it tumbled through decades in the space of nanoseconds. So we see Setek can do damage in a very similar way to Orikan, and we get some of his point of view when he's captured by Ahriman and the other Thousand Sons that might help with the context, so let's go over that. Time peeled back around Setek. He could not remember the early instances of this moment, but information existed in his awareness that could only be there if he had passed through this time already. He knew the names of the three figures, all Thousand Sons, who stood above him. He knew the positioning of each object in the cell, and most importantly, he knew that this was the final loop through this instance. His chronometron had moved position by increments through each of the early iterations of this encounter. Each time he had reached the device before he was destroyed, and each of those times he had been able to steal a sliver more time for the next instance. With each of these changes, he had increased his awareness and changed the setting of the chronometron. He only needed to perform this one final operation, and he would be able to collapse this loop of time. He would be free. The Necron works with Ahriman for his own reasons. They travel through the webway using a dolmen gate. Soon after, Ahriman meets the Pharaon, who can affect time, but was stopped by the Silent King as part of the Triarchy who rule the Necrons. The Pharaon claimed he could have moved time back and stopped the Satan swindling the Necron tier out of their flesh bodies. But then the Pharaon says he is in fact a servant and a cryptek, and the real leader is Setek, and we find his scarab swarm are rebuilding him, as Ahriman had been made to kill him earlier on. Setek fights Ahriman. He uses his time abilities to get closer to the Son of Magnus each time. Ahriman observes and sees the flaw in his movement, strikes and stops him. We later find out the enemies of the dynasty have moved the weapon Ahriman seeks. It's called the Key to Infinity. The dynasty had had this removed for fear of what it could do, and that's where the latest Ahriman book ends. I believe a new one has been announced, and I'll definitely be bringing that time travel lore to you if there's something in it worth discussing. So we've learned the limits of their abilities and the massive changes they can affect, walking down certain paths and trying out different choices. So they're not the masters of time, but they are the faction that can affect it the most in terms of using it the way they want. The time warping abilities, the warp, are more suspect. So now friends, I turn things over to you. What do you think to these abilities of the Necrons? Any good examples you want to share? Comment down below. I think Trajan would make a fantastic regeneration of the Doctor Who at some point in the future.